me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory, says Psalm 73:24. Good morning, and welcome to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLakian, here every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, bringing you the good news on business. And as we do each week, we bring you guests from a variety of different areas of business who can help us with unique insights and wisdom that may help you with your business. And this week's guest is Richard Brandt, who is the director of the Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University and has served in various vice president positions during an extensive 25-year career at AT&T and Lucent Technologies, and also is a well-known speaker and business expert, or consultant, I should say, who travels the globe in an extensive way. And we're going to be talking today to Dick about the Global Village, and that title kind of has a two-sided coin. One is that Dick actually runs a program within the Iacocca Institute called the Global Village, which I've been blessed to speak at the last couple of years. Very exciting program. And also, we're going to really focus on how the world has become smaller and smaller from a business perspective. With that in mind, for those of you who are just listening for the first time, I'd just like to remind you that, or let you know that, Tandem Radio has two simple goals. Our first is to help people be pointed directly to Scripture to realize that God wants to be a part of your business life. So we provide you with Scriptures. We help you understand that God's Bible is filled with wisdom that can help you not only in your daily walk with Him, but also in your day-to-day life and business and all the things you need to accomplish there as well. And that's our primary goal. Our secondary goal is to bring in guests, as I mentioned to you before, from all different walks of life and help and do our best to glean some nuggets from them. I call them golden nuggets that can help us with our business walk, whether it's from a faith side or a practical business side. And those guests typically give us some great insights and wisdom that can help you with your business. Again, we're here on the Bridge FM radio stations and also at tandemradio.com. You can listen to us anywhere in the world at tandemradio.com. Let's start with our scriptures, as we often do. Exodus 12:49. The same law applies both to the native born and to the foreigner residing among you. 1 Corinthians 14:11. If then I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying, I am a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker is a foreigner to me. Certainly talking about perspective. With that in mind, let me again introduce our guest. Richard Brandt is the director of Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University and has served in various VP positions during an extensive 25-year career at AT&T and Lucent, traveling around the world doing business in all different aspects. Dick, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Glenn. Good to be back again.
It's always good to have you here. And just for those new listeners, Dick, why don't you just reintroduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so I was 25 years with AT&T, most of that 16 years living overseas, buying companies, putting sales forces together in some 25 countries and managing joint ventures over there. But for the last 17 years, which is the topic of today's program, I've been running the Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University.
And that's a fun program.
Well, it's a fun program. In fact, it has four aspects. We're going to talk about one today, but the Global Village. But the Global Village is the adult program. We've trained 1,700 people, 131 countries. We also have a high school program that runs in parallel, where we've trained almost 900 high school kids that want to be entrepreneurs and work in business. And they've actually started as a Pennsylvania program, but they've actually come now from 57 countries.
Wow.
And we run programs overseas, like the one I just got back from China, and I'll be on my way to Russia next year to one. So we run programs overseas. They're called On the Move because we move it.
Right.
And the last thing we do is we place Lehigh students overseas in internships to work in foreign companies. And this past summer, 2 summers ago, we only did 14. Last summer, we did 42. And we're looking at 70 Lehigh kids are going to be placed through our network overseas next year.
Excellent. You know, I get a clear vision because I've been blessed that you've asked me to come up and speak at these Global Village sessions, and it's just so enlightening to see these young people with the spark in their eye, and then they walk up to you, and they all have different languages and different cultures, and it's kind of dynamic. But give our listeners a feel for that, Dick. I mean, what kind of impact do you feel this Global Village type of education program is really having?
Well, I guess the major issue, if you ask them, it's interesting, right? I mean, we have courses, and we have executives, and we have trips, and we have projects, but when you ask them, the number one thing for them is the network. The number one thing is that they will have people they've lived with, that they've eaten with in the dorms 7 days a week, 24 hours. that they can count on, that have the same values that they do. And they sort that out in this, 5 weeks that they're there. And that network is critical to them doing business around the world at a young age.
Right.
When they're 40, they can make this happen. But when they're 25, it's a different story, right?
Sure.
They need this network. And so that's the number one thing. From our side, what we're trying to get them to do is to present, to use their language skills to stand up, because this young generation today, and they're mainly between 23, 31 years of age, they're so electronically connected, they don't have to talk to anybody anymore. And so we're always putting them on their feet to talk. And then the third thing, and the most important probably, is having them work in teams, always in teams. 5 or 6 different teams that they're going to be on while they're there. Every one of the teams has got another 6 or 7 cultures. So that's what we're trying to do with them.
So you specifically diversify the teams by culture?
By culture.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you must see some interesting scenarios develop when you...
Tremendously interesting, where they don't understand each other and they
Right.
offend each other with their cultures, and some people don't want to join in the fray that might be pretty much typical between Latin American cultures. So the Colombians, the Venezuelans, the Italians, the Spanish, they're really having some fun and going at it, and the Japanese and the Chinese just back off because they don't understand it. That's not the way they would ever talk to colleagues in their culture.
Right. So that's, again, I get excited when I come out there just to see how dynamically different they each are with their approach and how they introduce people and all that. And I know you're giving them some common ground to work with as they move forward.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of the program, right?
With this in mind, is the world literally a shrinking place for business?
Well, it is, of course. I mean, there was a book written in 2003 called the Pentagon's New Map, and what it did is it broke the whole world into 2 groups, those that were connected, those that weren't. And the connected countries were those that had an economic and a political and kind of a military system that we might understand, especially the political. I was looking this up. I didn't know it myself. There are only... Well, by Amnesty International, there are only 63 countries that they would step back out of the 203 or so countries the UN recognizes that actually have a free, open, democratic government. So, there we are, right? We're a little over a fourth of the countries in the world think like we do about the way government should run, or not run, as it has been this last couple of weeks, right? But so the rest of the world isn't in that game, and that's really different.
Sure.
And you've got monarchies and dictators and theocracies and all kinds of other places the way those governments run.
Right.
So we come with that kind of open, free, transparent, democratic view. Doesn't run that way. It's not running that way in China, and it's certainly not running that way in Russia these days.
Sure. And it's amazing because I would have thought it was less, to be honest with you. I'm impressed, encouraged by that.
Yeah.
I wonder what it was like 10 years ago. I wonder how much different it was.
Yeah, I think they're more moving in that direction. So, some of them are getting there and some are not. Some are going to take more time, such as what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq and so on.
What I'm amazed at is that our government's not getting that. They just don't seem to get it.
No.
They seem to think that we have this freedom package that we just deliver to them now.
And there you go.
You're ready to go.
Well, look what happened in all the Arab countries,
Right.
I mean, the kids that took to the streets in Tunisia or Egypt or Libya, they thought they were going to get a new form of government. They got rid of the old guys, and what happened? It didn't work.
No, it's a shame. With that said, Dick, are there still opportunities out there for Americans in a global aspect? And I want to touch that question. It's 2 questions in one.
Yeah.
From a large venue, like when you were AT&T and so forth, or even from a guy like myself who has small businesses and says, I want to do something.
Yeah, I was just in the country of Georgia, which has kind of a democratic philosophy and feeling there. The guy that was running the country was a musky fella. And it was filled with small Western businesses, a lot of Americans coming in there because the market is going forward. There's a lot of young entrepreneurs there. The constraints are off. You can get your business established in less than 2 weeks in Georgia, whereas in some of the other countries that were former USSR, it would take you 2 years.
Right.
So there are those countries that are moving ahead. Kyrgyzstan is another one, Kazakhstan because of the oil money. And in those places, they're interested in working with small business people. I was also with a group of small business people just recently, I told you, in Serbia and in Croatia. And they're trying to figure out how to get along. For the big business, it's a much smaller palette. right? I mean, there you're really having to deal with the mega businesses, and so now you're going to deal with the Russias and the Chinas and the Brazils and the Japans of the world, where you can still do things, but those are the ones that understand big business. Korea runs on the basis of almost 4 companies right now. You know, the big chaebol, they run the whole country now. And so if you're going to be in big business, you got to hook up with those guys. They won't even talk to the small business people.
I hear you. So much more to talk about. We got a break coming up, and we're going to come back right after these words. This is your host, Glenn DeLakian, here every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today, with our guest, Dick Brandt from the Lehigh Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University, talking about Global Village and how the world is a shrinking place for business, and that we're getting closer and closer through technology and through relationships in the case of this Global Village program. We have so much more to cover in the next half, and I know Dick's got a great, fun story to tell you at the end of the show as well, and I think it's a story you shared with us at the Global Village, but I can't wait for our audience to hear it. It's kind of funny. But so much more to talk about here, and if you have an interest in or a bent for or a business going on in a foreign country or somewhere outside the United States, you're going to want to stay tuned for a lot more information about Global Village and Dick's experience here with it. And if you don't know much about the Lehigh Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University, take some time, go online, Google it, check it out. They got some great stuff going on, and I'm sure Dick would love to hear from you there. You listen to Tandem Radio, and again, this is your host, Glenn DeLakian. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. Just type in Tandem Radio, and you can see a bunch of our archive videos there. Also go to Ask Tandem, which is another one of our shows that's on YouTube that you can check out. And, of course, always feel free to reach out to us through info@tandemradio.com, info@tandemradio.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to contour our shows to kind of hit topics that you enjoy. You're listening to your host, Glenn DeLakian, here every Saturday morning at Tandem Radio, the good news on business. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back. This is your host, Glenn DeLakian, here every Saturday morning at Tandem Radio, the good news on business, with our guest today, Richard Brandt, who is the director of the Lehigh Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University and has served in various vice president positions during a remarkable career, a 25-year career at AT&T and Lucent, traveling the globe and helping them expand and grow their business and acquire businesses as well. So Dick has some very unique insights into global business. Dick, again, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
No problem. Our scripture for today, Exodus 12:49. The same law applies both to the native-born and to the foreigner residing among you. There you go. God telling you we should treat foreigners the same as we treat people of our own kind. 1 Corinthians 14:11. If then I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying, I am a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker is a foreigner to me. Think about that. It's not so much what you're saying, it's what the person on the other side of the table is hearing. What are they grasping? What are they comprehending? And I know Dick has a lot of insight into that for sure, and we're going to talk about Global Village and how the world is becoming a smaller place from a business perspective. Dick, let's talk first from the perspective of faith and the Christian walk. Is it difficult, or what is it like, I should say, for Christians doing business in these foreign countries?
Well, I think for anybody with a strong ethical value, and certainly Christians have a very strong ethical value and a code with which we adhere to, it's the most difficult. I think the most single difficult issue is that corruption does not translate the same way across the world. You have different levels of corruption, but it's always there.
Right.
And sometimes it's oppressive. We got out of the Ukraine because we couldn't deal with the corruption, and we had a particular wonderful business there. In the Middle East, it takes on another type of level. And I've worked in countries where they actually had cartels, and if you couldn't figure out how to work inside that cartel, you were not part of the workforce. They were just out, right? So, I mean, a lot of people have fallen. Regular people like you and I have gotten into business and thought they had a strong code, and then they had the chance to get the deal, and they said, oh, well, it's just a little bit to the left here.
Right.
And as you know, once you take that fork in the road, you just keep going.
That's right.
And it happens all the time.
It's a slippery
It's really,
slope.
and in some places, it's legalized. Corruption, the handout, the money going to the people that make the decisions, that's standard operating procedure for the locals, so they look at you like you're crazy.
Well, we look at it as corruption, they look at it like tribute, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So-
tribute, right.
So there's a big stumbling block for
Yeah,
us as
yeah.
Christians. So does that preclude us as Christians from doing business? in
No,
foreign
no, you
countries?
just have to be smart about where you're going. I mean, you have to make it very, very clear about what your moral principles are, because sometimes it's not just money, but your moral principles and your economic principles are to the partners that you're with. If the partners are not ones that are going to adhere to that happened to me in Africa, in Ghana. Thought we had some good business, did in the first contract. Second contract came around and everything changed. The first one was just to suck me in. And the second one was where the payoffs were going to occur and I had to dump the operation. It killed me, right? But I could have just stayed and said, well, we're here,
Right.
but can't stay.
Yeah, I hear you. How much of a role do the governments play in business? I mean, I know we're constantly fighting here in America to keep government out of business.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be working so well these last few years. But seriously, how much of a role do these governments play in your business interactions?
Yeah, well, I mean, with all the problems we have here, this is the most open and free society for business in the world. In most of the big countries, they still control the major businesses, right? So, telecom is completely deregulated in the United States. If you go into China, it's not deregulated at all because it's a cash cow. So the big governments still control the big business. They let some competitors on the fringe. Look what happened with Google. Google couldn't get in. I mean, everywhere else in the world, they're the major search engine, but in China, they said, no, we don't think so. And they rose up their own system called Baidu, and now they have 86% market share. I think Google has 6 or something.
Wow.
And so the government can control it. The same thing happens in Russia and even in the Ukraine and some of those countries. On the other side, in some countries like Italy and Portugal, if you don't have, even though they're not as corrupt as some of the other governments, if you don't have clear rules of how to do business, business people are frustrated and they leave.
Right. Well, I think people got some unique insights with the Arab Spring and all that, and even controls like on the internet. I mean, we take
Yeah.
for granted here, that the internet is free, you can do whatever you want. But yet, in foreign countries, they not only monitor, but sometimes they shut down and certainly
Right.
exclude certain businesses from being on the internet and so forth. And it's much more repressive, and that's all coming from the government.
I mean, the young guy that led the Egypt revolts, was leading it from his iPhone.
Yeah, right.
Right? I
Using
mean,
Facebook.
and the government had no idea what to do with that.
Right. Yeah, they caught on quick though.
Yeah, right. Well, talk about catching on quick. I was in a storm in Shanghai, and there were no taxis. And my Chinese friend, counterpart, pulled his iPhone out, and he started bidding for a taxi with extra money on
No
a
kidding.
network of taxi cab players that will take extra money for the fare. And it was an auction.
Right.
And he put, 10 RMB, 15 RMB, he got to 20 RMB, and one of the taxis took it, 20 RMB, $4.
Right.
Well, the fare was 16, so I got a $4 tip. That was mandatory because I auctioned, and this is a big network now, where
Wow.
you're auctioning with the taxi cabs.
So if you want a cab, you better have your iPhone
You have,
ready.
to, you
right?
have to have an iPhone so you can bid. Unbelievable.
Yeah, you mentioned before relevant to, and I want to make this a good point to our listeners. We take one of the things we take for granted here in this country is starting a business, and we could go home today and start a business literally, right?
Yeah.
We can get our LLC and all that done on the internet. But yet, you mentioned one country where they did it in 2 weeks, and that's a huge accomplishment.
It was in
Some
country,
countries take
Georgia,
2
the
years.
Republic of
Right,
Georgia.
Exactly.
Right.
Is that common in most countries?
Well, the longer one is the most common. Yeah, I mean, even with all the lawyers and stuff, it took me almost 6 months to create a business in Italy,
Wow.
in a country that's one of the leaders of the EU originally, right?
Right.
So all the constraints that are there, we've blown them out here in the United States more than anybody else in the world. And some countries like Georgia, I mentioned the leader there is a musky fella. He looked around and he spent time in this country, a lot of time, and he said, we're going to change the structure in my country to fit the way guys do it and ladies do it in America.
I know I wrote an article last year based on an article my son actually wrote in Lebanon about what it's like to start an LLC or a company in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And it was it blew me away that you had to have a certain amount of money in the bank first. You had to spend $3,000 on a lawyer whether you liked it or not. You had to spend fees, and it was incredible.
And then the police might come by and shut you down unless they're agreeing that
Right.
you're gonna start there.
Yeah, it's crazy, and we really take that for granted here in the
yeah,
U.S.
yeah, we do.
And unfortunately, our most recent administration is trying to take that even away from us to a certain degree.
Right.
But, we keep moving forward, and hopefully they realize that this free capitalistic market aspect is just so critical to what we do.
Yeah.
So, relative to doing business in these foreign countries, any tips or hints you have for the small business guy?
Well, the one thing that distinguishes America, and it comes right out of Silicon Valley, is the way that we collaborate.
Mm.
I mean, even competitive companies are located in the valley there in California because of this kind of open collaboration. In fact, I brought a guy to my program, Cesar Romano, and he talked about how companies on the web are opening their research up to other companies, and that is so completely foreign in most of these other countries. If they can learn how to bring companies together and collaborate, we have a Brandt Franklin Institute up by the Iacocca Institute at Lehigh there, and there must be over 30 young companies collaborating up there, even though someday they might find themselves being competitors. Right now, they're all collaborating in technology. And we seem to have got the model for that. And that's something the other countries are going to have to learn, because it's really isolated and really separate,
Really?
the individual companies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So the businesses don't talk to each other. They
No.
don't do business networking.
No.
Well, that's interesting to hear. And I know in a lot of what you're doing at the Iacocca Foundation Institute,
Sure.
I'm sorry, has an impact.
collaboration.
On collaboration,
Right,
exactly.
right.
You mentioned, I know we like to bring the Christian perspective back into
Yeah.
what we're doing, and you mentioned that there's a new president at Lehigh.
Well, no, this is a president of the University of Mary out
Oh,
in
I'm
North
sorry.
Dakota. Sorry, and they have a big leadership center out there,
Okay.
and they had the same president for 29 years, one of the longest running presidents, and it was just recently replaced by the youngest president in the United States. He was 34 years when he came from the Vatican, Father Patrick Shea. He's been made a Monsignor at 37 years old. He was one of our key speakers talking about servant leadership with Christ as the example of a selfless leader. And I've got, Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists and Catholics and Christians all sitting in the audience there, and he's talking about servant leadership and how you must bring yourself down to a selfless leader.
How was the reaction to that? Were people squirming in their seats?
No,
a little, or-
I was amazed. It wasn't a pin drop in the room. This guy held an audience like nobody I'd ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And he really got the message across. He really did.
Praise God.
Yeah.
Dick, real quick, I know you have so many funny stories to share with people, and you always do when we're up at the Global Village. Give us one last one. We only have like a minute left.
Yeah, the last time I was here, we talked about food, and you said you're a foodie. So I'm in Russia, right? And I'm evaluating a place for a big conference there. Happens to be a sanatorium. Completely remodeled the whole place, beautiful hotels. The food was unedible. Absolutely unedible. So 2 days there, I asked to see the director of the and she brings the chef along, right? And this guy could kill me if he could have got one of his knives out, right? He's sitting there at the table, and I told him the food was unedible. He said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And I told him, I said, "Well, could you even have some sandwiches at lunchtime and maybe some pasta in the evening?" And he turned to the director and he said, "Sandwiches are not food, and if this guy wants me to have pasta, I need a new kitchen."
That's a good way to get your business, right?
Yeah, right. I'm looking at the director saying, "Come on."
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess you lost a few pounds while you were there.
Yeah, I lost a lot. I lost about 3-4 pounds. Couldn't eat the food at all.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, Dick, thank you so much for being here again. I appreciate you coming down from Pennsylvania and joining us, and all the valuable information you just shared with our audience.
Great to be here.
You're listening to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLake, here every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to check us out at www.tandemradio.com. That's tandemradio.com. And send us a message at info@tandemradio.com. We'd love to hear from you, info@tandemradio.com. Don't forget, God wants to be a part of every aspect of your life, including your business life. So seek Him, pray often, look to His Word for wisdom, and He'll help you with not only your walk with Him, but also your walk in business. We'll see you again next week, or you'll hear from us next week again, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here at the Bridge FM.